Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm not sure if you're noticing the same thing I'm noticing, but in recent years, the world has become more and more polarized. People are staying firmly in one camp or another, and the gap is widening as every new crisis is framed from one lens or its complete direct opposite. And maybe, for the first time ever, this is now also happening in workplaces. Conversations are now riskier and laden with undertone. I've noticed reactions that wouldn't have been acceptable in the past. People are walking around with opinions that feel closer to the surface than they used to. Everyone seems to not only have an opinion on everything, but people seem more and more comfortable to express it openly, regardless of the potential consequences. And many leaders still want to respond the same way we used to 10 years ago. We don't talk about politics here. Well, yes, that used to work, but it just doesn't anymore. Because polarization isn't only happening outside of the work environment. It has seeped into every aspect of our lives, and views and opinions, they walk in every morning with your employees. The research over the past 2 years has been clear about something a little bit surprising. Avoidance doesn't reduce the division. It actually increases it. So today, I'm going to share with you what the research shows and how we can navigate these situations in our workplaces. But before we get too far into it, if you like this video and this type of content, please subscribe to my channel, like the video, or come on back and watch some of my other videos that I already have on my channel or my future videos. Now let's get into it. So recent studies in organizational communication and workplace psychology are finding that when leaders avoid setting norms around disagreement, teams default to tribal behavior. People start sorting themselves into safe and unsafe colleagues, people I trust or people I don't trust. Psychological safety narrows to in-groups, and then trust erodes in very subtle ways. One 2024-25 stream of research on workplace polarization specifically, it found that when leaders fail to set clear norms for respectful discourse, teams experience more conflict, more incivility, and also higher stress responses, which links directly to lower trust and greater emotional strain. Nobody wants to see that in their workplaces. A 2024 Polarization Research Lab study, so this particular study was cited in a 2025 Myers-Briggs company report. It specifically highlighted that employees feel their views are not valued, and then they become defensive when no clear guidelines for civil conversation are established. This lack of norms, it correlates with increased negative stereotyping. It also leads to more hostile interactions. In other words, in more simple terms, silence isn't neutral. It actually creates more of a vacuum, and vacuums get filled with assumptions. And if you want to explore more related to creating team norms specifically, you can check out one of my previous videos. There are 3 forces that are making polarization harder to manage. So one of those is identity-based politics. What I'm talking about is beliefs aren't just opinions anymore. They're becoming more and more tied to personal identity and personal values. There's also algorithm-driven outrage. So what I'm talking about there is social media rewards extreme takes, not the subtle nuance. Not to mention, this is now how most of the mainstream media seems to operate these days. Also, chronic global stress. We have wars and elections, economic uncertainty, environmental challenges. People are already dysregulated. So when someone makes an offhand comment in a meeting, it's not received as information anymore. It's not just a statement. It's more received as a threat. And when humans feel threatened, we all know the brain moves into protection mode. That's just basic neurology. But the mistake leaders make is assuming that professionalism will override that biology, but it won't. If you want to be a polarization-proof leader, the best option is not to suppress difference. That's never going to work, but rather build a container strong enough to hold it. So here's some suggestions. According to the research, the first thing you can do is establish explicit behavioral norms. Now, I'm talking about how do you build a norm for your team around disagreement. Here's some examples that might help you, but you might need to create different ones depending on what you're specifically seeing on your team and what they might need. So the first might be to critique ideas, not people. The second, no labeling language. The third, ask clarifying questions before responding. Number 4, and this one is actually a little bit difficult, we assume positive intent, but we also hold people accountable. When norms are stated clearly and they're enforced consistently, employees report higher trust, even when disagreement is frequent. Consistency is everything here. If you enforce standards selectively, you will only reinforce that tribalism. Number 2, depersonalize the issue. So polarized discussions often escalate because they become about identity. People start to associate the viewpoint to the person. It then becomes a person's character flaw. Skilled leaders need to shift language. So here's an example. You people always, that's not a good place to start. Try instead, the policy impact seems to, that change moves it from identity framing to impact framing. Now, this seems subtle, but it is powerful. When leaders model neutral, structured language, the emotional intensity will drop. You are teaching people how to think out loud in a safe way. Number 3, widen the shared identity. So research in social identity theory shows that conflict softens when a broader shared identity becomes more salient. What I'm talking about is, instead of focusing on you and I disagree politically, try something like, we are both part of this team trying to solve X. I know it sounds overly simple, but this reframing measurably reduces perceived threat. Highly skilled leaders constantly remind teams what they are aligned around. For example, the mission, outcomes, shared goals. That's what the work is about, not sameness of opinion. Number 4, address the tension. Don't pretend it isn't there. Leaders often hope that conflict will just burn itself out, but it rarely does. And if you get lucky where this happens, great for you, but I wouldn't count on it. When tension rises after a public event, for example, if you notice after an election, a global crisis, a controversial ruling, for example, ignoring it signals indifference. Now, I'm not suggesting you need to host a debate every time something happens, but you can say, I know there are strong feelings about what's happening right now. At work, we are committed to respectful dialogue and high standards of behavior. If conversations cross those lines, I will have to step in and address it. So that statement seems firm, but it also will lower anxiety because expectations are now made clear. Keep in mind that ambiguity fuels escalation. People need to be very clear about what's acceptable behavior in the workplace. Leaders quite often will think neutrality equals fairness. And I gotta tell you, it is very difficult to remain neutral. Leaders are humans first, and we all have vulnerabilities and opinions and preferences, just like our employees. But neutrality without structure feels like abandonment of the people who are being targeted. These leaders think professionalism will regulate behavior. But professionalism without enforcement, it's just wishful thinking. And when I say enforcement, that means follow through. Follow through with holding people accountable. And I know we all have good intentions, but holding people accountable, that's one of the hardest part in all of leadership. Many leaders will think that engaging will only make it worse, but in reality, silence lets the loudest voices define the culture. To address polarization the right way, successful leaders will understand this. You don't eliminate difference. Those are always going to be there. You regulate how difference is expressed. So to look at the big picture, unfortunately, we are not returning to a less polarized world anytime soon. That means this is not a temporary leadership challenge. It is a permanent and needed competency. You're going to use this skill well into the future. And the leaders who learn to hold tension without escalating it, they will stand out amongst their peers because they will be seen as the ones who are steady, because they will be able to disagree without dehumanizing, and because they will correct without shaming, and because they will understand that culture isn't built in moments of harmony. It's built in moments of friction. So if you're leading right now and you're feeling this tension in your workplace, you're not imagining it. Everyone is experiencing a change in polarization. The world is definitely more divided, and this is yet another competency that leaders today need to navigate on top of all of the rest. But this is also an opportunity, because when you become the person who can hold that complexity without collapsing into it, I think lots of people will notice. And I think people will gravitate towards that kind of leadership. It's not perfect leadership. There's really no such thing. But steady, thoughtful, mindful, grounded leadership, that's what people are looking for. And in today's VUCA world, VUCA meaning volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, that might be the most valuable leadership skill of all. And I hope that you found some value in today's content. And another quick reminder to please like this video and subscribe to my channel, and come on back for some other videos to show your support. And until next time, keep on striving. Bye for now.